Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for Penn State Global Entrepreneurship Week 2020. My name is Elizabeth, and I'm the coordinator of Penn State GEW. We're incredibly excited to be hosting our 12th year of programming at Penn State this year, and we're grateful to all of our campus and community partners who have pulled together an amazing schedule of over 50 events. We hope that you'll join us for as many of those events as your schedule allows. Please visit gew.psu.edu for that full schedule. Before we get started with today's session, I want to encourage all of you to ask questions of our presenter. At any point throughout the presentation today, please submit your questions in the comment section of either YouTube or Facebook, wherever you're joining us from today, and our speaker will answer those questions at the very end of today's session. At this point, I'd like to introduce our event partner, Meg Malloy, Chair of the Marketing Department in the Smeal College of Business at Penn State University. Smeal is the sponsor of today's event, and we're truly grateful for their partnership. With that, I'll turn things over to Meg.
Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Well, it is my real pleasure to introduce Dr. Jerome Williams, who will be speaking today about the financial ecosystem and Black businesses and entrepreneurs. Jerome is no stranger to Penn State. He started his academic career here and was on the faculty in the marketing department for 14 years before he headed on to posts at University of Texas at Austin and University of Pennsylvania. He is most recently at Rutgers University, where he is the Distinguished Professor and Prudential Chair in Business for the Marketing Department, and he's also a fellow of the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. So without further ado, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Jerome Williams.
Thank you, Meg. It's really great to be back, even if it's only virtually. As Meg pointed out, I have very deep ties to the Penn State community, and some of the things I'll be talking about today reflect some of my experiences while I was at Penn State. Most of my career has been spent looking at issues of social justice, and in today's presentation, I'm going to talk about social justice as it applies to entrepreneurs. For about 10 years, we've been doing work with a team of researchers. And these team of researchers are people, Glenn Christensen, who's also a PhD from Penn State, is now at BYU, and then my other colleague, Sterling Bone, who's at Utah State University. We also do a lot of work with the National Community Reinvestment Coalition, and Ali Lederer is our colleague there. So as you'll see through this work, we not only focus on academic issues, but we try to look at real world issues and how entrepreneurs are really affected in the marketplace, particularly entrepreneurs of color. If you look at small businesses, this will give you a little snapshot of why we think it's so important in the work that we've done. You know, small businesses account for 99.9% of all U.S. firms. And, they're small by nature, by the term, but there are many, many more of these businesses than large businesses. And they account for nearly half of all private sector employment. Now, the thing that drives our research is there a level playing field when we think about the number of small businesses that are minority owned? And we know that, as the second bullet points out, 29.3% of small businesses are minority owned. Now, if you think about minority-owned businesses and women-owned businesses, and you can ask the question that we've been addressing for many, many years now, are they treated the same in the marketplace, particularly in the area that we focus on, when they apply for loans, which helps them to continue to grow their businesses? And we're going to share with you some of our data that gives us an insight into what's happening and why we think that the playing field is not level. So moving on, I'm going to talk first of all about one of our major papers that was in the Journal of Consumer Research. And in this paper, we wanted to examine how small businesses, minority-owned businesses, fared in the marketplace. And we used a three-prong approach. We did a mystery shopping field study. That is, we sent testers out into the marketplace, testers who went to apply for a loan at banks. And we gave them a profile, and then we would compare how the minority tester fared compared to the non-minority tester. And then we did male and female to examine those differences also. We also did a qualitative technique, used something called ZMET, Zaltman's Metaphor Elicitation Technique. And here we actually interviewed actual business owners. We had them come in. We tried to interview male, female business owners, minority business owners, non-minority business owners. We asked them about the task of trying to get a loan at a bank and how challenging it was. And then finally, we did an experiment on this. And I won't talk too much about the experiment, but let me talk about some of the other two areas. First of all, what is the ZMET technique? For those of you who have not been familiar with it, essentially, it's a qualitative study where participants are asked to give their thoughts and feelings about a particular topic. And this topic was seeking financing for their businesses. And in order to generate the discussion, we asked the participants to bring in images that capture what they're thinking about in terms of the question that we asked them. So what I'm going to do is share with you now some of the audio of some of the interviews. We have tons of audio in these interviews, but the main thing I want to help you to see is that there's a major contrast between minority-owned small businesses and non-minority-owned small businesses in terms of the process and what they think about the process. So the ZMET technique goes something like this. They bring in a photograph, and the photograph is, in this case, Santa Claus is asked, how does this picture express your thoughts and feelings about the holidays? So when our small business owners brought in photographs, we interviewed them and said, how does this capture your journey to obtain a loan as a small business? So they described it as a journey, both the minority and the non-minority small business owners. But the difference was when we talked to non-minority business owners, they tended to describe it as something that was certainly easy to navigate. It was very difficult at times, but it was a doable task. When we talked to the minority business owners, it was a complete contrast. They thought of this as like a journey that was just so hard to complete, like climbing Mount Everest. And they felt that this was not an area where they knew people, they didn't have the connections. And it painted a very bleak picture in terms of the difference between what minority and non-minority small businesses go through. I'm going to play a few short audio clips here just to give you an example of kind of a summary of what we captured. As I said, we have much audio, but this kind of gives you a summary. Now, this is the white business owner that was interviewed, and here's how he expressed his journey.
Well, it's a pipeline, financial pipeline, and in my perception of just how it worked out, generally it was a fairly easy process, and it was easy to come to a choice.
So think about that. So this is a minority business owner, a non-minority business owner. He's describing the process like a pipeline and how it worked out. There's a drinking fountain, and the perfect time, there's help and resources. And so listen now to the minority business owner, and this was one of the interviews that I conducted.
You could look at it one way and say that it's leaking, but I'm looking at it from the point of view of that it's a faucet and it has dribbles of water coming out of it. Okay. It's not wide open, and it's not going to fill the sink or whatever. It's just dripping water out.
Okay. Now, why is that important? Now, what does that mean? That it's in terms of seeking financing, that it's...
To me, again, it means that when you go to these companies, these lending establishments, even when they say, okay, we're going to lend you this money or whatever, they dribble. They drip the money out. They don't open the faucet.
Okay.
They're not trying to fill your glass in any hurry.
Okay.
They're going to they're going to drip that money out to you.
So I use these two as exemplars of the contrasts that we noted in our research. And over again, the process for non-minority business owners was described as a fairly easy process to navigate. And both for the minority business owners and for female business owners, was always described as such a challenge and like climbing Mount Everest, and it was just difficult to achieve. So that's what we got from the qualitative side. But then we said, well, let's look at this from a quantitative side. Let's see what's actually happening in the marketplace. So we did a series of sending testers out, and this is what we call pre-application testing. They didn't actually apply for a loan, but they were to go into a bank and inquire about what it would take for their business. And we gave each tester a similar profile in terms of the size of the business, how long they have been in business, and what they thought they needed as capital to advance the business. And then we had white testers go in, the minority testers go in, and they, on paper, they were similar credit in terms of credit worthiness. And the same thing with our female testers. We made them all the same initially in this testing, which we started really over 10 years ago. But as the slide points out, these testers were trained extensively to take notes during the experience so that they could come back and we would analyze the notes and they would describe the process more in detail. And we also used hidden cameras. We had them go in with cameras in their lapel and capture what was going on. And then when they came back, we would take all the video, we'd analyze it in terms of how friendly the bank officer was, what kinds of requirements that they were asking, et cetera. So we analyzed both the audio and the video. So this is what we call micro ethnography. And if you're a researcher, it's a great way to capture data, but it does present some obstacles. For one, from a legal standpoint, not all states allow you to go in and capture videotape. Many states have what they call two-party consent. So if you're going to go in and videotape, you know, they would have to know you're videotaping. And of course, this would really offer some challenges in terms of what we were trying to get at. But in certain states, we did get the video, and I just want to show you how it went a little bit. This is just a small segment of what would, many tapes that we have of the interaction.
Nice to meet you. Jason, nice to meet you. How are you doing today? Pretty well, you? Excellent. Lunchtime? Yes. Just crowded. Well, something really quick. Sorry to interrupt. No. Okay. Please have a seat. All right. Okay, so tell me a little bit about what type of business do you have? It's desktop publishing, so we help people with just various sorts of publications for companies. Thank you. Okay. Personal projects, stuff like that. Okay. And what is the working capital, what you're looking for? Yeah, to expand, to grow larger. Okay. I'm just probably informed you. Lunch wasn't prepared. Saw that.
Okay, I think that gives you kind of a glimpse of what we tried to capture. And as you can see, we had blurred out the faces, and that was one of the requirements of our IRB to give us approval to use videotapes and videotaping in the states where we were allowed to do it. Okay, we're gonna.
Hi. What's your name? Hi, Pete.
Pete. I'm trying to get some information on loans.
Small business loan, right?
Small business. What for any amount, we require 3 years of tax returns.
Okay.
Okay. So on the personal side, we would also require the 3 years.
Okay.
And we would need a personal financial statement.
Okay, we have that.
Principals.
Right.
And we need the interim financial statements for the year, so the P&L, profit and loss.
Right. Yeah, my wife's my CPA, so she has all that.
Okay.
She even gave me some profit and loss and nets, and then she gave.
So it's interesting, you hear the actual bank officer say, well, we're going to need 3 years of tax return. Now, it's interesting, and I'll show you some of the data in a minute, that when the white testers went in, they weren't always asked for 3 years of tax returns. In fact, there were a lot of variability there. So on paper, you would think that if both of the testers are the same level of credit worthiness, that the requirements would be the same. But we found that they were different, and not only on that, but on many, many different dimensions. And so if you look at some of our data here, essentially you could sum all of this up in saying that there was overall poor service for well-qualified loan customers. But essentially, if you were a minority or a female, the service you got was even worse. As you can see, the red color is the protected class, the African American, and the blue line is the Caucasian. And these were just some of the things from the items in the data that we collected. For example, you can see offered to include an appointment to take an application, 23% for the white controlled, but only 11.5% for the African American tester. And on and on and on, we got this consistent pattern. Now, the interesting thing about this, in some of our more recent studies, we said, well, what would happen if we made the credit worthiness of the minority tester even stronger than the white tester? So then we changed the profile so that the African American tester was more credit worthy. And I guess you could say surprisingly or not surprisingly, we got the same results. The white tester was always treated better than the minority tester or the female tester. When that one video clip I showed you, they asked for years of tax return. Many times the white tester would be asked for 2 years of tax return, and the minority tester would be asked for 3 to 5 years of tax return. And so these differences helps us to appreciate why we feel that in the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years on this, that the playing field has not been level. So moving on, some of our more recent research, we started that research back in prior to 2010, and we've published several papers on it. Now, more recently, particularly this year, we've been doing research, particularly because of the COVID impact and trying to provide stimulus for small businesses. We wanted to see if we were getting those same kinds of results. And I'm just going to share with you some of our other studies. This is the summer of 2018. The question was, what documentation or information did the representatives say you would need with the application? And as you can see here, the personal income tax statements, first financial statements, et cetera. And the Hispanic and African American testers, once again, received more stringent treatment in this area. I should have mentioned too at the beginning, I'm going to try and allow some time for questioning at the end. So if any questions come up along the way or at the end, we'll have some time for questions on this. Information provided, loan fees, interest rates, approval time. Once again, we keep getting this disparity. So what are our recommendations in this area? And those who are small businesses or those who are involved in this kind of, have an interest in this area, whether they're a bank that lends money or you're seeking money, this is where we've been pushing for increased transparency. Like Home Mortgage Disclosure Act, where race is required, they collect the gender and race and ethnicity of the applicants. We don't do that in the banking industry, but there is a provision for it in the Dodd-Frank Act, Section 1071, and it has not been implemented. And so therefore, in terms of having the mass data to really look at what we're doing on an experimental basis, we feel we need to have that in place to address some of the issues that we're uncovering in our research. And particularly now, we've done research now under the Payroll Protection Plan, which is designed to stimulate small businesses. And we're finding that the same pattern, minority-owned and female-owned small businesses are not getting their fair share of the government stimulus programs directed to stimulate small business activity, particularly during this time of the pandemic. And I want to mention, if you're interested in research, to just mention another area. We haven't gotten into this too much, but I think researchers would be really interested in knowing that we're also looking now at linguistic profiling. Well, what is that, you might ask? Well, because we can no longer send testers in as we did before because of the restrictions, it just wasn't conducive to sending the testers into the bank. So now we've switched more recently, and we hopefully will get back to sending testers in. But essentially what we do here is we have the tester call up on the phone and ask about applying for a loan. And they would ask some of the similar questions that we had for when they went in person. But the interesting thing we're finding is that it depends on how the person on the phone sounds. There's a whole field of research called linguistic profiling, which is kind of similar to consumer racial profiling, where race becomes a factor in how the consumer is treated. And so if you have a black sounding voice versus a white sounding verse, you don't get as many callbacks. Female sounding voice, the same thing. Also, different names, surnames. If you say your name is Joe versus Jose, we've gotten significant differences in how people are treated. Now, we have not examined this data on the same large scale that we've done with the testing, but we're in the midst of collecting more linguistic profiling data. And we're finding that there's certainly an area that needs to be investigated. We have another paper that's not in this particular study that I'm talking about today, research on banking, but it's a paper that's coming out in a law journal, Pepperdine Law Review, on what we call the platform economy. Things like Airbnb, Uber, and so forth, when you call up for service. And what we're finding is if you have a black sounding voice or a black sounding name and you call up an Airbnb to rent a place, the response rate is a lot less, significantly less than a non-black sounding voice or black sounding name. So that gives us pause for concern. With the work that we're looking at in terms of legislation, there are some alternatives and things we could put in place. But with the linguistic profiling, it's kind of hard to see how we're going to address that issue, but we're trying to at least bring it to the attention of legislators. And I might add that the work that I'm doing with my colleagues, with that research team, even though it's been published in academic journals, we're very, very much concerned about real world application. And we've had our work cited in congressional testimony. We've met with the National Consumer Reinvestment Coalition and members of Congress. And so we feel that what's important is not only that we do have an academic impact, but certainly from a real world perspective, that we can change the laws so that the playing field will be more level for consumers of color, small business owners. So in the payroll protection program, I'm just going to go through these fairly quickly because I want to get on to another part of the presentation, but I just want to let you know some of the recent findings under this pandemic condition. We're getting the same kinds of results. We've done tests in Washington, D.C., Virginia area. We've got Los Angeles tests. We've gotten similar kinds of results. And just want to get to the recommendations and next step. This is where we're pushing now. Observe that this lending up to the financial crisis of 2008, this is what has been happening, steering others to less favorable products, that is minority small business owners. And did customers enter into commercial lending products instead of a PP loan, where they steered to other types of more expensive types of financial loans? And we found that they were based on our data. And then to what extent did banks apply the know your customer requirement in a discriminatory manner? So these are some of the issues that we're continuing to address. And we feel that there's going to have to be more need for transparency, and we've been pressing legislators in that area. So I'll just end on my slides about the banking before we go to the next segment of the talk about future research. The one area that we really want to look at is what we call the double jeopardy effect of systemic restricted choice. And what we call that is that what happens when, let's say, the African-American bank officer is interacting with an African-American applicant. Do we get the same effect as if the bank officer is white? Or what happens if the male bank officer is interacting with a female applicant as opposed to a female bank officer? And the hypotheses are there's kind of a double jeopardy effect. Not only is race a factor, but gender is a factor, and also the factor of the race of the bank officer. So we don't have conclusive data on that yet, but we feel we're getting to that point, and we will be collecting data over the next year to do that. So what I want to do now is go to another area of research, and this has to do with keeping the playing field level, not only for small businesses, but consumers in general. There's no question that we're living in an era of big data. And what that means is that consumers, marketers are able to collect more and more data on consumers. And my concern is, as a researcher that looks at social justice, is there bias in the data? Sometimes it's referred to as algorithmic bias. And you think about it, how much data we have or companies have on individuals, it becomes more and more problematic in terms of making sure that people are treated fairly. I'll give a little anecdotal evidence. When I was working for Penn State many years ago, I actually was a victim of identity theft, really in the early days of identity theft. And so I actually went to court to get my identity back. And this person, they finally caught the person. But when we went into court, the surprising thing is that this person had more evidence to show that he was Jerome Williams than I had. When the judge asked for a driver's license, birth certificate, all kinds of letters, he had everything that I had and more. And it gives you pause to think, how much data do they have on individuals and how is that data being used? What I'm going to do now is show you a kind of brief tongue-in-cheek clip of how far data can go. And we're not too far from this as we look at the future. Let's have this played.
Pizza Palace, guaranteed hot in 30 minutes or it's free. This is Mary. May I take your order?
Hi, Mary. Yes, I'd like to order.
Is this Mr. Kelly?
Yes?
Thank you for calling again, sir. I show your national identification number is 610-204-999-8-45-54610. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly. I see you live at 736 Montrose Court, but you're calling from your cell phone. Are you at home?
I'm just leaving work, but I'm...
Oh, we can deliver to Bob's Auto Supply. That's at 175 Lincoln Avenue, yes?
No, I'm on my way home. How do you know all this stuff?
We just got wired into the system, sir.
Oh, well, I'd like to order a couple of your double meat special pizzas.
Sure thing. There'll be a new $20 charge for those, sir.
What do you mean?
Sir, the system shows me that your medical records indicate that you have high blood pressure and extremely high cholesterol. Luckily, we have a new agreement with your national health care provider that allows us to sell you double meat pies as long as you agree to waive all future claims of liability.
What?
Do you agree, sir? You can sign the form when we deliver, but there is a charge for processing. The total is $67 even.
$67?
Well, that includes the delivery surcharge of $15 to cover the added risk to our driver of traveling through an orange zone.
I live in an orange zone?
Now you do. Looks like there was another robbery on Montrose yesterday. You could save $48 if you ordered our special Sprout Submarine Combo and picked it up yourself. Comes with tofu sticks. Those are very tasty, sir. Good value, too.
But I want double meat.
Well, I'm sure you can afford the $67 then. You just bought those tickets to Hawaii. They weren't cheap, eh? Oh, but I see you checked out the budget beach bum at the library last week. Up to you, sir.
All right. I'll get the Sprout subs.
Good choice, sir. Gotta watch that waist if you're hitting the beach, eh? 42 inches. Wow. Man, I'd say tofu and sprouts is like required.
That's how much?
Just between you and me, there's a $3 off coupon in this month's Total Men's Fitness magazine. Your wife Betty subscribes to that, right? Anyhow, clip that and it's $19.99 even. Whoa, looks like you maxed out on all your credit cards. Bring cash, okay?
So this whole notion of big data does have some policy implications that we're examining with our recent research. And when we talk about algorithmic bias, we can have online discrimination and also algorithmic generated discrimination. And these are both areas that we're looking at in our more recent research. And one of the things that we've noted recently, this article that was on algorithmic bias in car insurance, rates by zip code. There was a major story that was in Money Geek's analysis of auto insurance premiums by zip code. And in this article, if anyone wants to see it, I can send you the link. I don't think I'm going to go there now because we've lost some time. But you'll find that the auto insurance industry has rates, and they did this collection of data all over the country. Depending on zip codes that are more heavily minority, the rates are higher. And it has nothing to do with a person's driving record. And so there's a big push now to have auto insurance rates be geared more toward driving records, because it seems to be something that's unfairly geared toward communities of color. So going back to the bank lending decision, now we're also looking at algorithms there, because an algorithm is nothing but a series of equations, and it gives you a decision, and you can develop a series of equations for anything. You can develop a series of equations to admit people to Penn State or to the graduate school. So the question is, does that algorithm do a fair assessment, and is the decision fair? And there are being a lot of concerns raised now because we're getting to suggest that the algorithms don't always make decisions in a fair way. I'm going to talk about 3 areas where this can be the case. One is in retail stores, consumer racial profiling. For example, here's a story about 3 young Black teenagers got awarded $1 million in an Eddie Bauer incident because they were stopped for suspicion of shoplifting. And why was that? Well, it was because they were suspected of walking out the store with new shirts, and just so happened that their mother had bought them the new shirts the day before. And I bring this up because when I was in the faculty at Penn State, there was a similar incident that happened at Penn State at the Nittany in State College, where 3 African-American boys were stopped for suspicion of shoplifting. And why? Because they were wearing new shirts. And I know this incident because it was 3 of my sons. And I got a letter of apology about it. But I looked at this item a few years later and I thought to myself, wow, I got a letter of apology. They won $1 million. So as a researcher, this is something that prompted me to start taking a closer look at this area. And more recently, I'm beginning to see that artificial intelligence systems are coming onto the market. Here's one from a recent news item, using AI systems to detect shoplifters. Well, the problem with that, if you look at the way that the system works, it's designed to look at behavior of people. And from that behavior, the system tries to deduce and detect who might be a probable shoplifter. And there's research that suggests that the system tends to focus more on African Americans than others, even though with the data that I've collected for many, many years on shoplifting, that the modal group for shoplifting is white women in their 40s. Yet if you have a system that's focusing on a certain group, to me, that becomes problematic. So this is the way the system would work. It would actually look at the behavior through cameras, and what the appeal is designed to do is to take it out of the hands of the actual person, the person who's in security and has the human element. So I have some second thoughts about this, and we're doing research now to try and see how well such systems can work. And here's an example of some data we collected when I was at the faculty at the University of Texas between certain stores, where the one store, Dillard's, had 32% of the people they stopped for shoplifting were African-American, compared to only less than 10% of people who came into the store that were African-American. Yet with other stores, it wasn't the case. So you ask the question, why is that? What were they doing to get that kind of disparity? Well, when it happens, it can result in a court case. And I'm going to show you a short clip of how the impact of this can have on an individual, which happens too frequently. My research, I've been called on as an expert witness in close to 100 cases where people have been wrongly accused of shoplifting. So hopefully this video will play, and let's see if we can.
But that's exactly what Lloyd Morrison says happened to him and
Pause. Stop share. Oh. Got it. Oh, yeah. Get to it. Sorry about that. Here we go.
But that's exactly what Lloyd Morrison says happened to him and his 6-year-old son at this Bloomingdale's store in New Jersey 2 years ago. Morrison says he was shopping for clothes for his son, unaware they were being watched, until suddenly they were surrounded in the middle of the store.
4 men come up to you and your son?
Yes.
What did they say?
They say to me, we are from Bloomingdale's security. We had you under surveillance. I had 4 of my men had you under surveillance all this time. And we noticed that you took 3 pants to the dressing room and you put back 1. We want you to produce the pants. And we explained that we did not have the pants. We put them all back. And they did not accept our explanation that we put it back, and then demanded that we go downstairs with them. I refused to go with them, and then that was when one of them pulled his handcuff from his belt and said, "You don't understand. I will cuff you and take you downstairs. You will produce the pants." At that time, my son started screaming very loud, crying, and we went downstairs.
Downstairs in this store, Morrison says he was frisked by the security guards who found nothing, but they wouldn't let him go.
Then they came back and turned to me and said to me, "Pull your pants down." At this time, I was shocked. I was outraged. I said, "No," and they said, "We are not kidding. Pull your pants down."
So you did?
Yes. I pulled my pants down. They looked, they said, "He's clean." Then he turned to me and said that I should pull my son's pants down, pull my 6-year-old pants down also. I said, "No, I won't do it." And then with the act of intimidation, of constantly threatening that they will cuff you, I pull it down reluctantly. They found nothing.
What was happening with your son?
Screaming. He was there sitting on a little bench crying through this whole ordeal. You don't know what it is. Like when you're the parent, and you're sitting there, and this is happening, and your child is screaming for help. And there's not a damn thing that you can do about it.
Although Bloomingdale's denies any wrongdoing, 2 weeks after the incident, the store's chief of security wrote Morrison saying, "I extend my sincere apology for any inconvenience or embarrassment this incident may have caused you. Certainly this was not our intent." But it's too little, too late for Morrison, who has recently filed a lawsuit against Bloomingdale's for subjecting him and his son to a degrading experience they will never forget.
I tried to go to the right school, get the right job, work for the right company, grow my kids in the right way, live in the right neighborhood. And here's what we faced. You know, you feel so violated, so humiliated.
Okay, so interesting clip here about this case, and I've testified in many cases similar to this. And so I have my concerns about technology such as the artificial intelligence system that's going to detect shoplifters. And we can bring that around to small businesses in the sense that if you're a small business owner, there may be profiling going on by banks. I remember years ago when I was on the faculty at Penn State, there was a concern among some in the African American community that they were always asked for ID when they went into the bank compared to someone who was not a minority and they weren't asked for ID. And I approached one of the local banks about that, and it was explained to me that, well, the teller has to make that call. He or she is responsible for the money in the drawer at the end of the day. So therefore, they have the discretion of doing that. And so I said to the bank manager, I said, well, that's all well and good, but I don't understand how every time it's a minority person, they're being asked for ID, and it's not a minority person, they're not. And we actually did some testing of that, and we found that to be the case. And I have a colleague who's a small business owner, and he would tell me that whenever they had to send over deposits or do something in the bank, he would always send one of his white workers, because every time he sent one of his minority workers, there was always a hassle about the deposit or whether they could get things approved. So I think from a small business perspective, this kind of research that we're doing on consumer racial profiling certainly has tremendous effect for businesses too. Let me just wrap up with one final area, facial recognition technology. And this is another area where we have to be concerned about big data and what will accomplish. We're in that age of face marketing where all kinds of data is being collected, not only on individuals, but this facial recognition data. We know that it doesn't always work 100%. For instance, here's a news clip about Hewlett Packard looking into claims that webcams can't see Black people. And this was really the case where they did a lot of testing and the cameras were just not as accurate. Well, that's okay in one sense, but what if the camera is being used to detect criminal activity or identify people as criminals as facial recognition technology is used? I'm not sure I'm quite comfortable with that. Or suppose you're a retailer, you're a small business owner, and there's a theft and the police investigate, and there are cameras there trying to pick up who did the theft, who engaged in the theft, and we're looking at facial recognition technology. We have to be very concerned about this, I think, as a society and as researchers. And because these databases are so large now that it's very difficult to really kind of put full confidence in what they can capture. Here's another news clip about the HP camera that couldn't identify Black people. And this is perhaps the most astounding one, is that they used the facial recognition technology software on Congress. And 28 congressmen were mistaken for criminals. Now, you might say, well, that's fairly accurate, but the more disturbing thing is that more of the African-American and people of color that were congressmen were identified as criminals compared to the non-minorities. So I'm going to start wrapping up now. I don't know whether there are any questions, but let me just refer you to several sources in case anyone's interested. Here's our book on consumer equality, race in the American marketplace. A lot of the work that we've done on consumer racial profiling, we cover in this book, including all the statistics on who does the most shoplifting by race. Here's an article for those who are interested in the more academic piece that was published in the Journal of Consumer Research back in 2014, which was our first major piece about this type of discrimination we've talked about here. Here's another piece that we recently published in the Rutgers Business Review, and something in the Penn Regulatory Review that just came out about a week ago on small businesses of color matter too. So I think we will share, I've given some links, and at the end of the presentation, my colleague Elizabeth will share those links if anyone's interested in pursuing where those, looking at some of those articles. Okay, yeah, one more too, the technological workforce, when we talk about algorithmic bias, a paper we did which addresses some of the issues here about algorithmic bias. Okay, I want to thank you, and sorry for all the technological glitches, I guess in this era of Zoom technology, we as professors are moving more and more to online, and for some of us who don't do it as much because I've been an administrator for part of my career for the last few years. It's been more of a challenge for me than for others. So I want to, at this point, open it up to questions if we have any. Elizabeth, if we have any, if not, we'll wrap things up.
Hi, Professor Williams. Yes, we absolutely had a couple of great questions that came in via our social media channels. The first had to do with the biased treatment that many minority business owners face when they're going into a financial institution. In light of the pandemic and the fact that we are all working in a remote environment and many of these meetings are being hosted in a virtual setting, are any of those biases sort of exacerbated by Zoom? Are they alleviated by a Zoom virtual environment? What would you say is the impact of virtual interactions on that behavior?
Yeah, we have not tested virtual interactions like that. Let's say somebody's applying and they're in a Zoom meeting. All we've done is test over the phone where they can call up. Now that's an interesting hypothesis, and it's probably something worthy for us to investigate later, where we actually, if banks offer a Zoom meeting between a potential applicant or an applicant who's applying for a loan, I suspect we're going to get similar results to what happens when the person goes into the bank in person. I mean, based on all the 10 years plus of research that we've done, I think I could conclusively say that we're going to get similar effects. And we're already seeing it with phone applications or applying. And so I think the same thing would happen in kind of a Zoom setting too. But I can't say conclusively because I don't have the data.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting question to consider. Another question that came in that I thought was really interesting, you talked about all of the flaws in the artificial intelligence that's being used. And the question that we received is the technology itself flawed, or is it the error of the humans who are programming and installing the technology? And if that's the case, if we were to have more people of color involved in the production and installation of that technology, do you think that that would help alleviate some of those issues?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's what I was referring to in that one paper. If I can go back real quickly. Yeah, this paper here, Technological Workforce and its Impact on Algorithmic Justice in Politics. I would refer you to that particular paper because we addressed that issue. And the answer is yes, I think an algorithm is nothing more than a series of equations, and the equations are written by humans, and humans have biases. And there's no question in my mind that these biases can then come into whatever the equation is trying to capture. And if you have a workforce in Silicon Valley that's very limited in terms of the number of people from underrepresented backgrounds, then I think you exacerbate the problem by having people who already have biases for the most part, who perhaps don't understand minority culture and interactions as much, developing these equations. I think the biases then come into that equation. And even if you don't acknowledge that you have a bias, there's so much research today on what we call implicit bias, or biases that you're not even conscious of, that are also having an impact here.
Got it. Yeah, very interesting. Well, I think that at this point, we will wrap up with the questions. I want to make sure that I'm respectful of everyone's time. I know that a lot of people are joining us over the lunch hour, but I just wanted to thank you one more time, Professor Williams. This information has been invaluable to all of the audience members who attended. We got lots of feedback from people in the comment section saying how important this information is to be shared. So we really appreciate your time.
Okay. If you put put this out on video, take the glitches out with my trying to use.
Hey, it happens to all of us. Thank you for your patience as we worked through that.
Okay, thank you. It's been a pleasure being here, and I hope to physically get back to Penn State one of these days.
We hope so as well. I hope to meet you in person. I'd also like to thank once more our event partner, the Smeal College of Business, for their participation in the event. Both to them and Professor Williams, we are incredibly grateful for all of the time that you put into making this event possible, and we hope that our audience enjoyed this session as much as we did. To help us develop future GEW programming, we'd really love to hear all of your feedback. I'm going to drop a link into the comment section of both YouTube and Facebook. That's a brief survey, and if all of you or any of you would be open or willing to give us your thoughts and your feedback, we would certainly appreciate your time. And with that, we're going to wrap up today's session, but we hope to see you at additional Penn State GEW events throughout the week. Again, there are over 50 events scheduled, and you can see that full schedule of programming on our website at gew.psu.edu. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day.